You're listening to Make It, a podcast by Bonsai Creative that helps aspiring professionals in film get where they're going faster by dissecting the advice, knowledge, and insights of professional creatives in the film industry. I'm your host, Chris Barkley, and with me today is my good friend and Make It podcast co-host, Nicholas Buggs. Hello, Chris here with another episode of the Make It podcast. And this is an Indie Talk week, so that means I have my co-founder and good friend with me, Nicholas Buggs. Nick, say hello.
What's up, folks? It's good to be here. And as we were just mentioning, Chris, you know, this little pre-chat that we have before we get into some of these great podcast episodes, today, man, it drained my glass.
It did, but this is the week to do it, right? This is Thanksgiving week and COVID coming up.
Yeah.
What better way to start this week than to empty your glass before we even talk? So we might hear a slightly tipsy, Nick. Is that what you're getting at?
Hey, man, if I slur, then you know where it's coming from.
One of the bigger misses of this year is loading up on a lot of alcohol, anticipating tons of gatherings and parties and holiday stuff. And there's no one here to drink this shit. It's just you're emptying your glass and I'm like, I wish you'd be over here and I'd pour you another one because, I can't drink all this stuff, folks.
Yeah.
Like there's too much stuff here. And, here's the good news. Liquor doesn't expire wait, I don't think liquor expires.
Man, no, that stuff will sit around forever. You know, it's funny, I had left, my dad had brought some Heinekens over to the house at one point. And, my beer fridge was full and I'd actually left them outside, right? Mm-hmm. Like they were sitting on the, outside of the house. And, so yeah, I think it was a couple of weeks later, it was fall, winter time or whatever. So it was a couple of weeks later, oh man, I didn't bring those things in the house. My dad was like, so? Nothing wrong with those beers, man. You go get me one, outside, I'll pop this thing and, lo and behold, you pop that sucker open and what does it do? Right. It's ready for you,
It's ready.
So yeah,
it's ready to go. So
it's hard.
Here's to next Thanksgiving.
Yeah, for sure, man. And big shout out. I just wanted to mention that it's like you said, it's COVID Thanksgiving. It's a difficult time for many people right now. Right. Yeah, I hear you. But I'll just say it's a difficult time for many people right now. You said it like it's a joyous time. It's COVID Thanksgiving. Yeah, it is. No, I hear you. Right. But it's a difficult time for many people. It's a challenge. You may not be with your loved ones like you want to be.
Yeah, I'm in that
this holiday.
I'm in that boat.
Yeah, it sucks. It's just all of it just flipping sucks. But so we just want to let people know that we get it. We're, like you said, you're in that boat. We're doing COVID testing and all this nonsense that we got to do to make sure that some family members are feeling okay. But even through all the testing and all that stuff, you still have family members who are concerned for themselves or their loved ones as well. So we get it. So this is not a normal week, right? It's not a normal holiday. We get it. And we sympathize, we empathize, with our audience and everything that you folks are going through. And we're hoping that, with the folks that you are able to spend this holiday with, that you focus on that, right? You focus on the gratitude in those moments and you can focus on the fact that you do have someone that you're actually either thinking about during this holiday, that you're with during this holiday, and that you can find some level of silver lining in this, because like I said, we know it's a challenge, but we hope for a brighter tomorrow at the least.
Well said. That is absolutely the case. And I think it's good to just leave it at that, but I cannot resist adding one more thing, which is I think we all have to be easier on each other too. I do. I heard this great axiom, or I read this the other day, which is that social media brought us all together just to tear us all apart or just to divide us. And I think that we have to chill out on the ad hominem attacks of each other and stop pointing fingers. No one wants to get sick. No one's out there being foolish in their own mind. And I think we need to be easier on one another this Thanksgiving and this holiday season. And I think we need to be easier on ourselves, give ourselves a break. Allow ignorance to be a factor. Allow misunderstanding to be a factor versus malice. So I just thought I would throw that in there. Sure. Today we have some fun topics to talk about. We're going to talk about Shawn Mendes of all. Nick, Shawn Mendes?
I know, right?
We're going to talk about Shawn Mendes and Andrew Gertler's new connection into the film world and why it could be very interesting and a potential threat for indie filmmakers. We're going to talk about the phenomenon that is the Queen's Gambit. And anything that does what the Queen's Gambit has done in the last month is worth talking about, worth taking note of as an independent filmmaker. We're going to talk about how to double your money. If you're going out and getting a services deal with your independent film, meaning you're going to go out and basically have an aggregator push your film out to all these digital streaming services, no deal with Netflix, no big deal with Amazon or Hulu, for example, or Disney or Apple, but you're just going to be on streaming services. We're going to talk about how to double your money there. And we're going to end it with a little history lesson on a little known filmmaker named Oscar Michaud. So, Nick, why don't we hop into Shawn Mendes and Andrew Gertler? Content for a cause, right?
Yeah, it jumped out at me. You know, the idea that they're going to be launching a film and television production company. And so, of course, you know, like you said, like Shawn Mendes, like, why are we talking about Shawn Mendes? And, you know, I dig into this and it's like, wow, like, okay, they've already got, you know, one documentary that's, I believe, on Netflix already. And, you know, now they're creating this production company to create more. So I'm like, okay, well, what is this about? Like, why are they doing this? Why do they feel, you know, so compelled to create this production company? And then when you look at it, it says it's focused on issues that impact or are important to today's youth. So there's a very specific market that they're looking to. And basically what they're seeing is there's a gap in speaking on behalf of today's youth, right? So this is something that I think, you know, we've been saying for forever and a day, and we continue to when it comes to a branding and marketing standpoint for independent filmmakers. Like, we 100% respect the idea of creating art, right, for the sake of art. Like, you have something that's on your chest that you want to say. You have, you know, some artistic way that you want to put stuff onto the screen. We get that. And then we want people to continue to make that stuff. But I think there's a challenge there for the independent filmmaker in that, you know, really for the indie filmmaker, if you want the more financial success, then basically you need a stage. And a stage is really defined by your audience. And the audience is, in indie space, a community that you're speaking for, right? It's basically like, you know, why does anybody want to watch your content? Because in order to get to your content, they have to sift through all of the other content that's out there. So something has to compel them to watch what you're making. So if you start making stuff for communities, if you make stuff that speaks for someone else's voice, then there's a built-in audience right there who might be clamoring for your content because you're speaking for them. And when I see Shawn Mendes and company creating things, they've got the right angle. They've got the right idea, but it kind of makes me cringe a little bit. Like, is this going to grow a trend where you have, you know, big money kind of infringing upon the world of the independent filmmaker? You know, like, if you have enough of these production companies coming out of big money and big studios and whatever, then maybe the independent filmmaker is too late to the game that we've been talking about. Right. And that's so I think it's a good thing, right? It kind of puts this type of content more in the market potentially, because they're going to have deals with Netflix and Amazon and whomever else. So that's great. But if all of that content is being usurped by the larger, more powerful I'll just say people, right? Because I don't know what's going to happen with the studio, with this production company, and how big it's going to get. But if it does catch on, then my concern is that if independent filmmakers at large don't start to lean in that direction, then is there a concern that it could push them out?
Yeah, and it's something we've been talking about for years. It's really one of the best branding and marketing plays you can make as an independent filmmaker, which is to involve your community and find the stories that your community needs to be told. So is there someone that's maybe autistic that plays on the basketball team and this is their senior year? And can you do a documentary on them? Or is there IP that is maybe associated with your town or state? And then you can turn that IP, that book or whatever it may be, into a movie and get the community behind it and tell these stories that need to be told, that are better told by independent filmmakers with talent than told by studios who might sort of misdirect the movie or add more to it that needs to be added, or glitz it up or make it, one of these situations where we say, hey, don't ever let the facts get in the way of the truth kind of thing. Yeah. And now you have the digital world. And I really believe this is kind of where this came from. You have Shawn Mendes and his manager basically saying, this is the new world of filmmaking where the playing field is even. We can start, or more even than it's been. We already have a relationship with Netflix. We can start making things that matter and not worry so much about box office, right? Because now we look at the box office and we don't know when it's going to come back.
That's right.
Even after the vaccine, 52% of all respondents in a survey said they feel either somewhat unsafe or unsafe. And this was if a vaccine was available. So it's still 50-50. You see that Universal Studios and other studios have come in and said, hey, we're not doing a contract for 75 to 90-day runs in theaters anymore. We're going to do a 17, and that is a real number, a 17-day run, and then we're going to go to digital. And that's the way it's going to be. So what happens when production companies and studios with seemingly endless resources and experience start to make the content that we have feasted on as independent creatives for so long? That is the question, Nick.
Yeah. And I think this is, again, one of those things where we're just like, start making that content, if you're not already. I mean, it's not like no one in the independent filmmaking community is making this content. We know you are, and that's awesome. But if you're not, right, if you have that, that sci-fi idea that you've been working on, for who knows how long, I mean, make it, if it's the art that you want to make. But I'll just say that right now, from a financial standpoint, a return on your investment standpoint, an audience engagement standpoint, find the art, right? Find the balance in it, right? There are sci-fi communities, right? But just make sure that you're making it with that community in mind, and you're speaking to that community about what you're making, and that they're with you along the way, and that you're not just making the content because it interests you. There is something to be said about making art that and that you are interested in. That'll probably be the most true. Yep.
But I get what you're saying. But two things quickly. One, yes, we're definitely not saying don't make your stuff.
Exactly.
Definitely go make it. What we're saying is that if these types of players get involved in these types of stories, a bar might get raised that'll put even more scrutiny on your work and more pressure on your budget, because you'll have to reach a bar that's higher than you're used to having to reach as an independent creative in a film that's about a social cause, let's say, for example, right? That's what, we're really getting at. And then the second thing is you mentioned sci-fi, but I think it's horror. I think the one that, and I know it could have been anything, you're just throwing out sci-fi, but it hit me that the one that independent creatives really, to me, misunderstand the most in terms of their intelligence and their love for the genre is horror. Because you'll see indie creatives make a horror film and really spray and pray. Sometimes it's like, I think you're spraying and praying. I think you're saying, we're going to do this, and hope that everybody gets a thrill out of it every Halloween kind of thing. And this is like, oh, this is smart business. This is smart business. We're going to make a horror. Now, this is me coming from the experience of us having invested and did advisory work on a horror film that has over 1,000 reviews on IMDb, which is all I will in. That audience is so sharp, so judgmental, so on it. They know all the origin stories. They know all the tricks. They know what you're trying to do. They know when you cheated. They know when it's fake. They know that stuff. And I actually think that, and it just, again, I know you're just saying sci-fi because it was just what came to your mind, but it sparked my mind just to say, let's not underestimate our audiences, especially the ones we turn to in indie film regularly, like social causes, like documentaries, like horror.
Yeah, and that's the idea, is that, again, there is a sci-fi community, there is a horror community, but just because you make a horror movie doesn't mean you're making it for that community. Because, like you mentioned, they're gonna smell bullshit, right? Like, they're gonna know. They're like, oh, I mean, come on, you didn't make this for us, right? You didn't follow, any of the rules that we expect around these types of things. You didn't take it to that next level that we're expecting and whatever. So that's the idea, is that anything that you make. So if you decide to make a sci-fi, if you decide to make a horror, have the community in mind, engage the community as you go through it, learn about what they want, learn about what they like and what they don't like, learn about the stories that they might be, kind of chomping at the bit to see next that haven't already been done. That's it. Like, when you're in there with the community that you're making the work for, then they're going to be there with you when it gets released. So I think that's the idea. And then again, back to the Shawn Mendes thing, it's like, that's what he's doing specifically, right? Identifying causes that are important to the youth of today. So I'm sure he's got an advisory board on what are the causes that interest youth today, right? What's important to them, so that the content can be made for them. So that's
you don't
what
say,
I think,
Nick. You think he has people that are developing strategy around advice and branding and marketing for him?
Hey, only the best do, right?
I think a lot of times as indie creators, we're very cynical about anybody who wants to be part of the process that isn't one of the makers or creators on the ground. And, you'll say to yourself as an indie creator, well, Steven Spielberg didn't need that. And you would be wrong.
Right. That's exactly right.
All the big studios do this in-house. They have people that do it, and we don't ever hear about them or see them because the production is so big. Even down to the writing. If you talk to an indie writer and say, hey, I think you should take on a co-writer, the first thing you're going to do is scream at you until your hair flies off and be so offended, right? Which is understandable. But then they're eventually going to say, well, I don't think I do. So, and then you'll wait and see what happens. But in studio films, it happens all the time. And there's no choice. It's like, we think the screenplay is lacking a little bit. We're going to bring an XYZ ghostwriter. We're going to bring him in for a 3-week contract and add it to the budget.
Right. And
you never see that ghostwriter. He writes it or she writes it. Script gets better, and then it gets shot. And there's no choice.
And but the thing is that, those people who come in aren't there to rewrite the script. Right. They're usually brought in for a specific talent that they have. It's like the idea of having a script that you expect to be a comedy, but some of the jokes aren't necessarily hitting.
Punch it up.
Exactly. Punch it up. So let's bring in the person that can punch it up. And that's the idea behind that, right? Make it a little bit better. Let's bring these people along. So I think so. With Mendes, that's what they're going to be doing. He has a foundation that he's going to be leveraging, input from in order to make this content as well. And again, this just gets back to, what we've been kind of saying to the independent filmmaker is that, that's what you want to know. You want to be on the ground. You want people advising you, about what's happening in those communities that you're speaking for. So if you have an idea for a piece of art that you want to create, I think that honestly, independent filmmakers, you need to have advisors who are helping you through not the script, but just, do you understand the concept or the themes that are in there strongly enough in order to speak for someone else in this, so that other people join you on this journey? Because again, that's what's going to happen with, again, if this is successful with Shawn Mendes, there will be advocates, community organizations, individuals who are already signed up for these projects because they know what those projects are about and it speaks for them. Like, if that's the angle that he's going, it will be successful. And I think that that's the angle that independent filmmakers, need to take.
Let's talk about Netflix, and let's talk about the interesting case of the Queen's Gambit. This is a 7-part series that launched on Netflix. What date, Nick?
I think it was October 23rd.
October 23rd. And since then, it has got how many views?
Well, it has been viewed in 62 million homes, right? Households.
And that's 7 episodes, right?
Yeah. And that's since the 23rd of October.
You put that in perspective, that's outrageous. That's 25% of all Americans. And I don't even know what Netflix US market share is. I mean, that could be 75% of their total market share in the US.
Yeah, it's insane. And, my question to you, Chris, was really like why?
Yeah.
Why this series? Because I think, we looked at it. I mean, the book that this is based on isn't a recent thing.
Nope. 1983, right?
Right. So it's not particularly relevant to the large audience or the majority audience of Netflix watchers. Right. So it's not like they're like, oh yeah, I've read that book, I'm going to watch this thing. Like, what happened?
Right. It's IP, but it's not exactly Marvel.
Exactly. And this is record breaking. So there's a couple of things, and I know you've got some thoughts on this one, but one of the things that kind of stood out to me is like, since there isn't that intellectual property, that IP behind it that is relevant to today, and nothing, necessarily the actors that are in it or the producers or the directors or the production company necessarily screams at you immediately. Like, that's not what drew people to it. It's almost crazy. Like, we're in a whole new world now, where like anything could hit, right? Like, It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. Like, it's just crazy. It's like, so it's kind of like reverse engineering all this stuff, because I don't even know if Netflix knew that this was going to happen.
Well, they probably knew they had something. They didn't know they had something like this. And before we get into the why, we should kind of break down what this movie is. I mean, or it's not a movie, it's a series. What the series is. This series doesn't have any A-list actors in it. I think for the average American, they would be challenged to name one person that was in it by name, even one. It is not about football. It is not about football.
Right.
It is not about some great athlete that amazed us all. Like, it wasn't like The Last Dance with Michael, about Jordan that took the world by storm. And obviously so, right? You could understand it. Oh, this is Michael Jordan. This is about a fictional chess player that took on the most difficult chess players in the world and beat them. And as a female. And simultaneously, she's battling these addiction demons and this sort of demon of her past from being sort of abandoned in this fairly unique way. I won't give it away for those who haven't seen it, by her mother. So, and father. So why does that show resonate so much? And I think, so I just wanted to set the table for everybody. Like, so here's what we have. We have a movie that's about arguably one of the most boring activities to most people. right? I happen to love chess. I was actually such a nerd, Nick, that I was in the chess club in high school.
Right. Yeah.
I was. And so I love chess. I knew I was going to watch this and I actually double checked it, Nick. I was watching the show and like stopping, like pausing every now and then to see, okay, are they bullshitting us, or is this actually a real chess move that would create the reaction the opponent had? And they did not cheat. And I admire it so much for the fact that they took the time to research chess and actually set up the board and made those moves true to form. Like those were real moves that would really put an opponent in a serious bind. Like when they said checkmate, it was really checkmate. When they said 3 moves to check, it was really 3 moves to check. And I verified it. A lot of times in movies that have like a chess scene, you'll see these ultra close-ups, Nick. So you can't really tell where the piece moved.
Right. Yep.
You just kind of have to take the writer's word for it that was checkmate or whatever. But this was not like that. They want you to see the moves. They want you to see, knight to E3 and all this kind of stuff. Like they want you to understand the game as it goes along. It actually feels educational. And so going into the why of this, because it isn't on paper. Like you said, Netflix couldn't have been sure they had anything here, because this is about a book that no one's heard of, that came out in 1983, that has no A-list stars in it or name recognition stars in it, and to the general public, right? To movie people, movie people are going to know them.
Yep. And
it's about chess.
Right.
And it's going to break all the viewing records Netflix has ever had.
Exactly. It's crazy, so you have to ask the question why, right? Especially like in what we do, right? It's like, okay, indies, like how do we make sense of this for the content that you're trying to create? Because, we just jumped off of a conversation about, how we want independent film, filmmakers to find a community.
Yep.
Right. And this one's an odd one, right? Is it the chess community that's, maybe it's people like yourself? And, I kind of feel like the chess community is peppered throughout, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's people that play chess or enjoy it that you never know it because it's not something they talk about. Yep. Right. But it's been around for so long, right? It's been passed down so many times. Then maybe that's the thing. Like you mentioned, they got very specific about these moves.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe it seems like the audience is somewhat niche and might be small, but it's probably a lot bigger, especially, Netflix is international. So, there might actually be an international influence here as well. But when I look at it, it's like, maybe that's what it is. Maybe there's enough people who are like, oh, snap, like they're talking about chess. And not only they're talking about, but this story is phenomenal. Cinematography is great. I can verify that what they did on that table is legit. I'm all in.
Yep.
And when I go and I tell my friends, you got to watch this, I'm not going to tell them that it's a chess movie, just like I don't tell them that I play chess.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because that's not what's going to get them interested. I'm going to tell them this is a phenomenal show.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe that's what happened. Maybe there's enough chess players out there, again, who live, it's the pocket chess life, right? It's like the secret life they live. But they tell people about it. And then it's just word of mouth just kills it. I don't know. It's amazing.
There's a thread going on through society right now that I think it touched on, and I'm going to get to it. Because I have a few theories here, and then I have like my ultimate thought on it. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I take you back to 2014, Nick?
Let's do it.
6
as long
years
as we can get
ago.
out of 2020, man, I'm good.
Well said. Let me take you to 2014, to a better time.
That's right.
So this was about 6 months before I would make my first Tesla purchase. So my first Tesla was a Model S. And I was so nervous about it because there had been no car company that had ever not gone bankrupt in the United States since Ford, basically. So the odds were highly stacked against Tesla. And it's really easy to like have 2020 vision now on it. And you see what it is today and you're like, okay. But when I had been following it basically since 2009-ish, 10-ish, And I'd been following Elon since PayPal days. So anyway, it was I was very interested. People know I was interested. People that know me know that I am a first adopter, and that comes with major, major risk and a great way to blow a lot of money. And there were people telling me, this guy is not going to succeed. There is no way to do it. This is going to go to zero and you are going to lose all your money. Do not do this. And I was nervous. And so I got in one of them and I drove it. And something happened. There's a moment, and it's indescribable, but there's a moment that you can have. There's an experience that you can have where you can't put it into words, but you understand it. You understand that there is a fundamental shift happening. You understand that something different has happened that no logical person can say they don't like, or no logical person can get in this car. This was my experience. No logical person can get in this car and say it is not 10 times better than the experience of getting in any other car they've ever gotten in. That's how good it was. That's how different it was. That was the moment. And I was 2 feet in from there. Okay. And I remained sort of 2 feet in on them. Right.
Right. Yep.
You turn on the Queen's Gambit. And I mean this, you are 5 minutes into that thing and you have that moment. There's this moment where you're like, I'm in. They've got me. This is fundamentally better than anything I've seen on Netflix or recently, period. It is just, and there's a moment 30 minutes in where you're like, oh no, here they go with the political stuff. Here they go trying to force a narrative down my throat. And then just when you think it's going to be too much, they don't do it. And they just tell the story. And it's a great story. And it's in there. Now, here's the thread I was talking about. And tell me if you agree with this too. I think musicians and content creators and social media have been pushing their primary audience out of, sort of into a place of discomfort for their audience's parents. Okay. So most social media audience is 13 to 17. If you want to sell something, right? Maybe 13 to 25. That's what everybody's making stuff for, musicians and everything else. Right. Well, all the music that's pop and mainstream is explicit. It's going to have that little E by it, bro. Mm-hmm. So can you let your kids listen to what's popular? Can they listen to wet ass pussy? No, they cannot. Right. Even if you have a 15-year-old, do you want them to hear that? Do you want that message? Is that indoctrination? Right. I'm all for free speech. The problem is there's less and less alternatives that your kids are going to think are cool that aren't also explicit. Right. There is cursing in the Queen's Gambit. And I don't recommend it for kids that haven't been exposed to curse words, or kids that are, let's say, maybe 10 and under. But the upside of watching this child grow up to be a woman and do what she's doing in chess and take on an intellectual endeavor is inspiring. And I think the Queen's Gambit learned from the Queen of Katwa. I think it was the name of the movie, the Disney movie about chess as well, right? Was that the name of it? I think Katwe. It was. Yep. Katwe. I think they learned from that. That was way more popular. That definitely outkicked its coverage. And they learned something. They said, okay, wait a second. There's an audience that we're not addressing right now because they're being pushed out of the mainstream market by explicit and ever more explicit and indoctrinating content. So can we touch on these different subjects that parents might tolerate a little bit of adult action from, but teaches your kid a good lesson instead of a political lesson or some other lesson? Or like Kid Doodle TV. Is there a place where my kids can go and watch content that's free from society so I can just raise them free and then let them decide when they get older? And I think that also strikes a chord and it sort of hit this like really cool audience balance where the 45-year-old mom's going to like it, and the 25-year-old or 20-year-old daughter of that 45-year-old mom is also going to like it. Like, there's so few things like that in the world, right? Because it's just edgy enough to get the attention of that 20-year-old, and it's just educational enough and inspiring enough, and frankly, American enough to really hit that 45-year-old woman, right? And everybody can like it. And so here's what I think happened. This is the big why. I think you're 5 minutes in, you have that experience. Wow, this is 10 times better than anything I've seen on every level. It's accessible. It's on Netflix. Let me go tell somebody about this. Someone's always asking me, what am I watching? I'm never watching anything, but now I actually am. Let me tell them what I'm watching. You have to go see The Queen's Gambit.
That's awesome.
You have to go see The Queen's Gambit. I was recommended this show 5 times in 7 days to watch it. So basically, I was socially pushed into watching this. And the reason why that's significant, Nick, is because how do we normally watch Netflix shows?
Well, I was going to say that Netflix pushes it to you through the algorithm.
Exactly. The algorithm pushes a show to you based on your viewing habits, and that's how you watch stuff. But this is the one Netflix show in a long time, maybe since Tiger King, yeah, where people were telling you to watch it by word of mouth. And if you don't know why that's so valuable in the world of marketing and branding, we call that the Holy Grail. It's the Holy Grail of branding and marketing. It's what you want your film to do. You want people to tell other people to watch it. What does that mean, Nick? It means that I'm going to take my personal brand. I'm going to take my personal credibility that I've built my entire life, and I'm going to put it on the line by telling you to go watch something. I'm going to do something very scary, right? I'm going to reveal my taste level to you. Okay. My sister-in-law told me to go watch Stomp the Yard. That was her very favorite movie. And I've not forgiven her since. I will not take movie advice from her.
Right.
She revealed her taste level to me. It was very scary, I know. But this is the risk you take when you do word of mouth. That's why word of mouth is the Holy Grail, Nick.
It is. And so I think you touched on a lot of great points in that. And of course, now I have to go watch the entire thing myself. But I think, again, you touched on a lot of great points. And one of the things that I want to emphasize in that, when you talk about this word of mouth, is that the time it takes for that to spread is exponential in streaming world, right? Mm-hmm. Especially in COVID world. But basically it got to 62 million households within a month, right? So again, the thing is that, how many people were interested in it day one, right? So it might have started out as a Netflix algorithm situation, right? Where it's a new release, they put it out there, and then people are enticed to click on it. But that wasn't 62 million, right? So it's like they were enticed to click on it. And then, as you mentioned, the content, the nature of it, the themes that are in it, the quality of the work, like it was so phenomenal that all of a sudden it spread like wildfire.
Yeah.
And I think that's just something else to speak on. It's just that the time that it takes, right? I mean, it's a month, it's insane. And I'm sure that in that month, like everyone's watched like every episode of the series. Like, it's not even like, oh, I watched episode 1 and I thought it was phenomenal. No, in a month, they probably watched all of them, right? Like, it's the veracity of it, right? Just to get in there and watch all of this content because you're so enamored by it. It's amazing. Yeah. And you mentioned something earlier about, the deals that studios have or had with the theaters. What do you say, 75 to 90 days? Mm-hmm. Yep. That's 3 months. Right. And we're talking about within 1 month's time, this thing was viewed in 62 million households.
Right. It's times 7. Wow. So it's at an hour an episode. So you're talking about 7 movies, arguably 4, maybe 4.5 movies worth. I watched all 7 hours in 2 days. So that's how engaged I was.
Right.
And
that's what I'm saying.
I'm not the busiest guy in the world, Nick. I'm not the hardest working guy in the world, Nick, but I got a pretty decent schedule.
Yep. And you made time for it.
I did.
That's what I'm saying. Like it's unprecedented, right? The times are unprecedented. The way that we're consuming content, the way that we're, virally sending these messages to people, like it's like, you have to watch this. And then people aren't saying, I'll get around to it. No, they're watching it. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that and the question is, and this is, we could kind of go with this topic forever, but it's like, there's so much content. We always talk about that. There's just a crazy amount of content. But the fact that someone says now, hey, you need to watch this, it's like to me, to a degree, it's a big thank you. Mm-hmm. Right? Because it's like, there's so much content, I don't even know where to start. So I think that, and even Netflix, they can put their top 10s and top 20s, whatever there is out there, and you could use that model if you want to. But even in that, there's a lot of content. They still present to you a lot of content on the screen, and you have to figure out how to use your investment, which is your time, right? Like, where do I want to invest the next hour and a half or 2 hours? And if a friend says to you, hey, watch this, it's like, oh, thank goodness. Like, dude, I appreciate you, man, because I didn't know what to pick. Now I know what to pick.
Yes, nothing's more disappointing when a friend asks you to watch something and then you don't like it. And it offends you and it offends your friend. Like, your friend almost can't believe it. Well, you didn't like that?
Right, yeah.
It's like when I told Jason, who is our co-host on the film investment series, I told Jason to watch Game of Thrones, and he didn't take to it right away. I'm like, oh, just go to hell, dude. What are you talking about? You didn't like this, right? Like, I can't even accept that he wouldn't like it, right? And then, then I started, right, and then I started hearing a few more people that just didn't like the gore of it, like the violence level of it. Right. And then I was like, oh, that makes sense for Jason. Yeah, he didn't like certain scenes, like in a lot of Tarantino movies that go over the top, for example, with the violence for the same reason. Like, he just thinks it's unnecessary. I'm like, okay, that makes sense for you. I got it. So yeah, just an amazing thing. And, if you can get Holy Grail, that's what you're looking for. And I think the only way you get it is if you make something that a person has no shame recommending it. That's the secret. And it's a really hard thing to accomplish. It's maybe one of the most difficult things to accomplish. So really kudos to the team that made the Queen's Gambit, because that's hard. Because even I mentioned Tiger King, which did get a lot of word of mouth, right? But how people were asking you to watch it, right? They're like, oh, you got to see this crazy shit. Like, it started with a caveat,
Or not even that. It wasn't even that they recommended it. They would just say that people are talking about it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like, they'd mention oh man, I've heard about this show. Right. Or like, man, it's crazy. Like, so many people are talking about Tiger King. Honestly, no one recommended it to me. Like, no one was out, like you're talking about, like, no one just put their brand on the line.
Right.
That you should watch it.
Right. Because they know, like, look, here's the truth. It was always out of the side of their mouth. Like,
that's right.
There's this crazy shit. I watched it. I'll admit it. I watched it. Yeah, you should watch it too. But I mean, I'll admit it. I'll watch, see, it's kind of like one of those deals where they're recommending you to watch it because they don't want to be the only ones.
Right. Yeah.
And they don't want to have to put their brand on the line to say, oh, I'm the kind of person that likes this kind of entertainment. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with it.
I saw it.
It's
my
just
friend told me to watch it.
Right. Right. It's the same thing we talked about last week, where the husbands are like, yeah, I watch the Kardashians, so my wife is watching it. I watch the Kardashians, so my girlfriend's watching, or whatever. I don't really keep up. I don't really keep up with it. What you say Scott Disick did? No, he didn't do that last week. Like, oh, how do you know the details? Oh, I was watching with my girl. Yeah. So we do this to protect our brand. And that's why Holy Grail is so important, because when someone recommends it wholeheartedly, that means they know it can't miss. And if it misses for you, they know it's on you.
That's right. Yep.
And that's a beautiful thing. I love it, man. Exactly. So let's stay on the topic of elevating the game of independent filmmakers. We talked about Holy Grail. Let's talk about doubling your money. And this is something we've talked about in previous indie talks, but not in this through this lens. So we've talked about the fact and the fear that maybe we're not going to get epic films because of digital going further or going down the line in the future, because it just doesn't make sense to make a 3-hour movie and put it on digital the way that viewing habits work. And then I realized that something else is happening too, in that, and look, I've made it very clear to this audience and to you, Nick, that I think it's class action lawsuit worthy what digital streaming pays for films. And I think it's an absolute crime that the gap between 20,000 people seeing your movie at fair market value in the theater and 20,000 people watching it on streaming is hundreds and thousands of dollars is an absolute shame. And like I said, it feels like a crime. That being said, like right. That being said, that's the game we're in. And there was another type of creator that was in this game before even maybe we were as indie film creatives, and that's musicians. You know, when Steve Jobs created iTunes and created the iPod, he changed music forever. And there were people who stood up like Taylor Swift and Jay-Z and said, you know what, just take Dr. Dre. They said, hey, take my music out of your catalog then. Like if I can't get fair market value for my music, just take my music out of your catalog and I'll sell it somewhere else. You know, bands like Radiohead say, hey, you know what, I'll just give my music for free and whatever you want to pay for, whatever you think it's worth, you can pay us for that on our website. And there are still musicians to this day that follow some type of model that's outside of the streaming world. But what they realize is that this is the future. This is not going anywhere. And if you want to maintain your career, your relevance, your popularity, which therefore gives you your opportunities, you kind of have to have your music on these streaming services. So what we're starting to see is a slow creep where songs were 4.5 minutes, then they were 4 minutes, Nick. Then they were 3:45. Then they're 3:30. Yep. Now the average song length is just over 2 minutes and 44 seconds. And you figure it out. You're like, oh, I get paid per stream. No one's buying albums anymore. So there's no reason to make November Rain, right? There's no more 8-minute, epics. Same thing happening in film, right? No reason to make it. I want this streamed as many times as possible, and I've found a way to double my money without any additional effort, right? And so I think if you're the type of indie filmmaker, you're making your first film, maybe your second film, you're going to go out and get a services deal, basically an aggregation deal where your film will go out to all digital streamers that are AVOD or TVOD. You're not going to get that Netflix deal. Maybe the film's not good enough or doesn't have enough eyes on it to get a deal at Apple TV Plus or Disney or Amazon or Hulu, et cetera. So all the big players. And you're going to get this services deal. Make a movie that's just over an hour long. Feature film. Anything that's over 35 minutes, I think, Nick, maybe I have that number wrong. I think anything over 35 or 40 is a feature film. So make a feature film that's an hour long, hour and 5 minutes, hour, 15 minutes. Start writing your scripts that way. And you will literally double your money. Now, it's not going to be a lot of money. Caveat. But it will double. Yeah. Because you'll get double the views in that same, 20,000 the idea is that people can go through your content much faster, Nick. That's the idea.
Yeah. And I think that, for me and, what we do all the time is always trying to find these new opportunities for independent creatives to leverage, existing systems when necessary and then escape from those systems when necessary as well. But, this idea of making this type of content, I think about, the idea of just splitting the existing content. So, if you do have a 2-hour long film, maybe there's an opportunity to create a 2-part series, right? Or it's a sequel, right? So you create your first part and then you have it end.
Same budget, right?
Yeah, same budget. You just, it's creative editing in that, in this standpoint. So now you're going to release 2 films. And the idea there is that, maybe you're actually giving the audience, which again, I've mentioned this earlier about the investment, so if I'm going through all this content that's on one of these platforms, there's so much out there. If I'm going to pick something that's new, right, that isn't, like you said, IP, right? There's not some intellectual property behind it. It's not some brand that I know or some actor that I know or director, producer. And I choose to click on something. I then have to choose what my investment in that film is, right? I have to say that, I look at it and I'm like, oh, it's 2 hours. So it's a 2-hour film from somebody I don't know. Like, am I willing to do that?
Right.
Versus if I saw it was 45 minutes or an hour, I might be more inclined to give you the time. And if you made quality work, and when I say quality, it's basically, if you made work that will attract a large enough audience and that word of mouth that you mentioned based on people watching it, then they'll watch the next thing. Right. And then, as Chris is mentioning, you'll then get paid on both. Right. So instead of getting paid once on that great piece of work that they stuck around for, now you get paid on both things because you made a great piece of work that's now in two pieces. They watched the first one, you got paid. They watched the second one, you got paid. And it fits the current zeitgeist, which is, it's like what Quibi was trying to get into, right? You've got 10-minute, content. You've got smaller content in other places. They're trying to find this sweet spot. And I think that with things like, like you mentioned Tiger King earlier, there's all these other docu-series. There's series in general that are like that 45-minute, maybe to an hour mark. And maybe that's what we're seeing is that it's not just about docu-series. It's not just about series. It's about how people are consuming content. Right. So if you're continuing to make content that doesn't fit the model, then you're working in a place that was 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But the current model is saying, no, 45 minutes. So I think it's a great idea. So if you have an opportunity, within your existing work, maybe you don't write it for an hour, maybe you write it for 2, you use some creative editing and say, well, how can we end this, right, as one film? And how do we begin it as a second? And then maybe you get, more hits. Maybe you have people now invested in 2 films. Maybe they'll invest in your next one as well.
Yeah. And beyond that, I think, or at least to amend to that, I would say, look at the business model. And this is what we have to start doing. If you haven't been doing this already, look at the underlying business model and be realistic about where your film is going to end up. Right. So I know that, Nick, you've talked about this a lot. There's this dream that you're going to end up in a big theater. And then when you don't have a plan. And then that becomes a problem. Well, now COVID's taken that away.
Right.
COVID has Thanos snapped your dream. And so now you can be more realistic about where your movie's going to end up. And you can say, what's the underlying business model? What makes this model work for them and what makes it work for me? And then try to make your content based on the model that you're researching because you think your film's going to end up there, because these models exist across the board. If you're making short form content and you think it's going to end up on YouTube, figure out how YouTube monetization works and how can you meld your content to sort of fit that business model. If you think it's going to end up on Netflix, don't worry about it because Netflix is going to license your movie, right? Or if you think it's going to end up on Amazon, they're going to license your movie. You don't have to worry about the model as much, but you still need to understand it as much as possible, understand what the licensing means, what the rights mean, and how you get paid. So I'm not saying forget about it. Always know the business part of show business, right?
Yeah, but that's the key.
But that's it. Yeah, but every digital side. Every digital streamer, because I know you want to go on that, but every digital streamer has a different model. That's the thing I think that might be a little shrouded, which is AVOD and TVOD and SVOD all have different models. And so if you think you're going to end up on TVOD mostly, understand what transactional video on demand really means and how that business works, Nick.
Yeah, and how they're going to pay you in the end, and I think, so here's the thing that...
And make your content to fit it, I should
exactly. And because the key thing that you mentioned earlier about, class action suit worthy, but it's not, because filmmakers and content creators are giving into this, right? They're giving their content. This isn't a secret, right? The person on the other end isn't lying to you. They're not necessarily even hiding anything from you. They're telling you what you're going to get, and you're giving them your content. But it's like, the whole idea is that you want to get fair market value for your work. Mm-hmm. But the business model isn't set up to give you fair market value for how you're creating your content.
Right.
So create a model, right? Like create your content in a way that it can get fair market value. So, maybe it's that 32-minute long thing that you create, and you create 5 of them, right? Mm-hmm. Each individual one becomes its own its own product and its own opportunity for value, versus if you had released it as one thing, right? It's only going to get paid on once, right? But like you said, you could double, you could triple, you could quadruple this thing if you broke it up into pieces. And again, if the content is good enough, then the person who watches the first piece is going to want to watch the second and the third and all the way through the 7th, like the Queen's Gambit, right? It's like, what is compelling me to want to watch this? And again, we're in that world where people want to continue to watch, right? If they're hooked on the first one, they'll watch all of them. Mm-hmm. So get paid on all of them, right? Like that. Why not? So I think that's definitely a model that, again, it's creative editing. Right. You have to think about your content and where you could have these cuts that occur. But I think that is definitely a model that, indie filmmakers need to embrace in this new zeitgeist.
100%. And going into this holiday week, people are going to have a lot of downtime, time to be creative, time to think, time to be with family. And I wanted to leave this conversation with a little note of motivation, hopefully, and a little story that's potentially a little well known by the audience. And that is the story of filmmaker Oscar Michaud. And if you want to Google that, it's Micheaux. And this is an African-American filmmaker, and the first African-American filmmaker in the U.S. or anywhere that I know of in the world. And he made his first film in 1919, I believe. And he made it his own IP, Nick, off a novel that he wrote called The Homesteader. He was the very first person to make a feature film that had Black people in front of the camera and behind the camera. And he did this all throughout his film career. And because of Jim Crow America, Nick, and because of sort of the injustice of the time and inequality of the time, he would have to go with and back then you had real film, right? So it was in tins. He'd go with his films under his arms and go theater to theater, knocking on the theater doors, selling his movies based on the merit of the film alone, right? Because he wasn't going to get any credit based just on who he was in society. Knocking on each theater, getting them to sell the film, really sort of hustling, getting them to buy the film, and really hustling his passion, his whole life, his entire life. And when a theater did buy it, because of segregation, the Black people would come to watch it and support it, and they'd have to sit in the balcony. And the white folks, they would sit on the floor seats, and they'd be completely segregated for the entire show. And these were called race movies at the time. And he had to deal with this his entire career, all the while becoming basically the godfather of Black film. And here's one little other known thing about him. That gold statue that we all want, that is formed and developed and modeled after Oscar Michaud. So most people don't realize that there's a pretty good case to be made if someone of color is saying, hey, how come we aren't being included in this award ceremony when we're doing pretty great work out here, especially considering that statue is formed and developed and modeled after a black man, black filmmaker, black writer that really was a pioneer for all feature filmmaking, especially filmmaking with sound, because a lot of film before Oscar didn't have sound. So 1919 feature film with sound, black people on camera and behind the camera. And the main point I want to make here is he hustled, even in big Hollywood, he hustled his films. He had the energy to get fair market value for his movies. And so I say to you as an independent creator, don't give up that fight. Don't give away your baby. You know, the thing you worked so hard for, don't give it up to somebody else to go make you into somebody. You can, if Oscar can go theater to theater, door to door during Jim Crow America as a black man in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, you can definitely find a creative way to take your film and get fair market value for it, Nick.
Yeah, for sure. And, I'll give you my French here. So the EAUX in his name is it's an O sound.
O sound.
Yeah. So it's Oscar Michaud. And one of the things, there was
that's my Southern accent I'm putting on it.
There you go. There was a documentary on him, the Czar of Black Hollywood. And there's a section where they talk about the actor, Oscar Michaud, so about the this man behind the film. And one of the things it says is he is also a pioneer of independent cinema. Though the end products of his labors often were technically crude due to budgetary constraints,
right?
Michaud, the filmmaker, is a symbol of the artist triumphing over long odds to bring his vision to the public at large while serving in the socially important role of critical spirit. Okay, so, getting back to what you said, right, about continuing to, I hate to use the word hustle in this case, right, but it's continue to create, continuing to push the content, continuing to leverage that medium to speak larger than himself. I think that there was a lot in those films that he created that, spoke to, the effects of segregation, on the Black community. There was a lot. And I think he, in his, 22 silent movies and 15 talking pictures, I mean, it's a lot. He was prolific at the time. Mm-hmm. But I think getting back to that, the fact that his, though the end products of his labors often were technically crude due to budgetary constraints, right? This is the world of the truly independent filmmaker, right? I think that's it. I think, the independent filmmaker that, does not have that technically crude aspect those are the folks that excel, above and beyond. But on average, right, if you're looking at the average independent filmmaker, they have budgetary constraints that limit some of their abilities in cinematography or sound, or even some of the casting that they can afford to onboard.
Exactly.
But with Michaud, it says, again, while serving in the socially important role of critical spirit. So that gets back to the conversation we had earlier about who are you speaking for, right? So you can create all of this content that by, standard media, or I'll say big media standards, may be crude. But if you're doing so in a fashion that speaks for a community, that has a larger voice, that speaks for a cause, that does something greater than yourself, then what you're speaking for will likely transcend your budgetary constraints.
Yep.
Right. And I think that's the key. That's why I think he is. I mean, it's great that you brought up that topic, because that is a pioneer in independent film. And I think that's something that independent filmmakers need to maintain focus on. So yeah, it's an awesome tale.
Yep. And so it's this Thanksgiving, lift up a glass and do a cheers for Oscar Michaud, and let his spirit live through you as an indie creator. Nick, what a fun conversation this was. Wide ranging, good times as always, my friend.
Yeah, for sure, man. I was with you all the way until the end when you said lift your glass, because Mine's empty, and I'm gonna have to go fill it just to make that toast to Oscar. But yeah, man, this is awesome. I love doing this. Hopefully, we've brought some cool insights and ideas to the independent filmmaking community, and as always, I look forward to doing it again.
100%. And if you guys want to get involved, you can. You can find us on social media at _Bonsai Creative on Instagram and on Twitter. You can also find us on Facebook by just searching for Bonsai Creative, and we'll come right up. If you have questions, concerns, comments, corrections we need to make, you can email us at contact@bonsai.film. That's BONSAI.FILM. And for all things in the world of Bonsai Creative, you can always go to our website full of resources. It's at www.bonsai.film. So that's www.bonsai.film, BONSAI.FILM. Tons of resources there where you can learn more about Bonsai Creative and our journey in independent film. So with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving. Nick, sit us off with the credo.
For sure, man. Again, thanks so much for this convo. I appreciate it, man. It's always wonderful. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there. Be safe, be mindful, be grateful during these times for what you can be grateful for. And with that, please be better, be creative, and be engaged.
And thank you for listening. Nick, talk to you soon.
Yes, sir.
All right, brother. Peace.
All right, man. Laters.
Later. You've been listening to the Make It podcast. To find more information about this week's topics, including links to relevant blog posts, projects, and indie creatives, please visit our website at www.bonsai.film. If you haven't already, you can join our podcast community on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice by searching for Make It Bonsai Creative, and the show will pop right up. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at _Bonsai Creative, and Facebook by searching for Bonsai Creative. And of course, if you're looking to take a big step towards your filmmaking success, go to www.bonsai.film and click on Book Us to schedule a free discovery meeting and needs assessment. You have everything to gain. Until next time, be better, be creative, be engaged, and thank you for listening.